Hello, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to all the friends of Casa Árabe once again in our online program. Welcome to this online lecture, which is entitled Poems and Revolutionary Movements in the Arab World by our guest today, who is Professor Francesca Maria Corrao, Professor of Arabic Culture and Language at Luis University of Rome. We are very happy to have her with us today. And she's going to bring us into a very fascinating world, which is the world that links poetry with revolution and with social change. We at Casa Árabe have put in place a great variety of lectures, seminars, events that talk about social change in our days, in the current times. But today we are going to tackle this very current issue from a perspective which is as important as other perspectives that we have implemented, but I would say with a different input, which is the realm of poetry and how it facilitates, it enables, it reunites many souls that are really working with a great conviction that the changes are needed in societies, and this is something we witness with regards to the Arab world in the last years. This lecture today is part of our Aula Árabe University program. It's the number 14th. This is an annual program of lectures that Casa Árabe organizes in collaboration with the universities of Madrid. Following the suggestions of the graduate and the postgraduate programs of those universities, we invite relevant speakers and experts in the international arena in various disciplines related to the Arab world. Its objective is to promote knowledge about Arab affairs and culture and complement the education provided in those university programs. Today's session is organized with the collaboration of the BA in Semitic and Islamic Studies of the Complutense University in Madrid. And in this way, we count also on the presence of Victoria Crash Ruiz Zorrilla, who is also here with us, and we'll see her in a minute. She's lecturer of Arabic language and Arab literature at the university. And she's going to be the introductor of Professor Corrao and her lecture in the framework of their program of studies. So, hello, Victoria. Welcome to Casa Árabe's online program. And before giving you the floor, I would like just to stress that related to the attendees, to the students that are joining us today. That it is important, all those that are following us via YouTube, it is important in order to register your assistance to this lecture and later apply for the Aula Árabe certification, that you should identify in the chat that you will see in our YouTube channel with your name, surname, university program, and university. You can also, of course, use the chat later on to pose your questions to Professor Corrao, which I will read them and I will pass them to you. So this will be afterwards at the Q&A part of the session. So it's time to welcome Victoria and give you the floor.
Thank you, Nuria. First, I want to congratulate and thank Casa Árabe for this already consolidated program, whose organizers have been able to adapt to the new adverse circumstances. It is a real honor for me to present the speaker who is with us today, and that from the area of the Arab and Islamic Studies of the Complutense University of Madrid, we have wanted to propose, thinking that her work on the poetry of the current Arab revolts, it's a very interesting complement to the subjects that deal with contemporary Arab literature and today's Arab society of our degrees of Semitic studies and modern languages. And of course, to any university program focused on the study of the contemporary Arabic world. Professor Francesca Maria Corrao, it's a great reference to Italian Arabism and an international figure. Her academic career is extremely active. She's currently a tenured professor of Arabic culture and language at the Free International University of Social Studies, Guido Carli of Rome, and director of the Master in Economics and Institutions of Islamic Countries at the same university. Before that, she's been also a professor at the University of Naples, and she's been invited to teach courses and conference to numerous universities, such as the University of Cairo, Beirut, Amman, Cambridge, and Oxford, among others. Her academic work focuses on Arab and Islamic culture and history and Mediterranean studies. She has written numerous books and papers on ancient and contemporary Arabic literature and society and politics of the Arab world, always paying special attention to progressive and engaged movements and authors. Today, she's going to tell us precisely about that new poetry that is being cultivated after the Arab Springs. It is a subject of undoubted interest, so I don't want to take more time from her. I'm sure that we are all going to enjoy her conference very much. Professora Francesca, thank you very much for being with us today. I'll give you the floor.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure for me to be with you and the student. I'm so sorry not to be able to be there, but it is wonderful to have the chance anyway to be in touch and to share my appreciation for Arab poetry, and especially the poets dedicated to Arab revolutions. I will just one second. Okay. So can you please put the PowerPoint? Okay. So on this first slide, you can see a boat. It is a boat that drowned in the sea, in the Mediterranean Sea, and it was filled with people trying to run away from the poverty, the disaster, the political disaster that took place after the Arab uprising, the Arab revolts, and the singing that the mothers were producing of nostalgia for their kids who drowned in the Mediterranean were the topic of an exhibition that I organized at the Fondazione Orestiadi in Gibellina in Sicily. The spirit of studying poetry and to organizing an exhibit, it is linked to this major idea that life and essence of art, whether it be painting, music, or dance, lies in expressing through a wellspring of emotion the universal realm of the human spirit. It is a melding of the individual and the universal. That is why great art reaches out beyond ethnic and national barriers to move people all over the world. This speech is by Japanese philosopher Daisaku Ikeda. Next. And it explains why art, it has been always so important in world history. And what happened before we reach the explosion of artistic expression during the Arab Revolution. There is an important change that took place in Europe in the 18th century. And of course, it was due to the fact that there was a shift, an important shift from art that was for the kings, the prince, or for the religious scope, for the churches or for monasteries, monastery, and the French Revolution that opened the path to a new bourgeoisie, a new upper middle class that came in touch with the possibility of expressing and exchanging their view on beauty, on art. So there is also an important change, a new hero emerging from the French Revolution. And this new hero is not only in paintings, but also in poetry and in novels. So a different narration starts. So what happened that when we come to study Arabic literature, we learn about the French colonization, the British colonization, and we know that together with this colonization, European culture arrived in these countries, and of course, it affected. Next, please. Thank you. It affected the ideas of the young Arabs who wanted to transform their condition of oppressed by this foreign government into a new modern state with an independent government. In order to evolve their cultural experience from the traditional classic Arabic experience, especially in that time that it was under the Ottoman Empire, which was extremely conservative and military. What happened is that they started studying, translating, publishing in presses, and in creating also new art through the invention of the novel, the introduction of the novel in the Arab culture, and also the transformation of Arabic poetry very little slowly at the very beginning with the introduction of a new hero. The new hero was, as we just mentioned, Ahmad Shawki, which was the Egyptian poet, the most known poet, who started writing important elegies. The most known one was the one dedicated to Mustafa Kamel, who was the leader of the first Egyptian National Party. And this poem was inspired by the Lamartine Ode to Bonaparte. Another important evolution introduced by Ahmad Shawki was the use of tragedy or drama in order to expose his ideal of independence, just talking about historical events. Like, for instance, he was writing a drama, the tragedy of Cleopatra, where he was talking, of course, about the Egyptian queen under the colonization of the Roman Empire, and it was used as a metaphor to express the desire of this queen to get rid of the Romans, or at least to rule with those Romans who wanted to rule with her and not over her country. And so we learn about another kind of Cleopatra, because Cleopatra in the Western tradition is the Shakespearean woman who is a bad, evil woman who's trying to cheat the poor Mark Antonio. But here she's a cunning politician, she's wise, and she is defending the honor of her country. Next, please. So this is how the transformation, the revolution in Arab historical condition brought a change into the language and into the poetic expression. This new change, a stronger change, was introduced when the Arab countries got close and then achieved the national independence. And when we have the transformation of most of Arab poetry into a free verse modern poetry, the most important exponent of that new trend was Nazik al-Malaika, the Iraqi poet, and also Badr Shakr Sayyab and other poets. And these poems poems were spread through newspapers, which were Adab, Shia, and Mawakif, the most important newspapers which were printed in Lebanon at that time. So from an historical point of view, we know that the important cultural revolution brought in by Nasser and the dream of Pan-Arabism, so most of the intellectuals sitting side by side with the political leader who were hoping to give a better future. But of course, as you know, things didn't always go as they would have loved to. And when there were the first political and military disaster, like the 1967 war, the position of the poet changed. An important example in this case was the one of Nizar Qabbani, who was formerly known to be a love poetry, and then he turned to be an engaged poetry, because they felt that the importance of freedom of speech and education, it was prior to other exigence. And another extremely important poet at that age, in his transformation from a poet supporting Nasser ideal into a poet which took distance and started promoting the more and more freedom of expression, was Adonis. And in his poetry, for instance, he used ancient mythologies or characters like Ulysses or the history of Al-Andalus in order to explain, to use these stories as metaphor to explain what was going on in the Arab world. So we're talking about revolution which were absolutely important because they radically transformed the history of this country in a very short period. Another tragic and important revolution was the one that was linked and still is going on, the story of, because revolution is we just use the term revolution as connected in this historical moment to the Arabs, what in Europe is known to be as Arab Spring, but actually revolution is a term that has many meanings, and revolution is a radical change. It's a radical change in the life of a society, in the life of an institution, or in the life of a person. And this is what Adonis was saying in his poem, especially in the poem Hada Huwa Ismi, this is my name. I am the revolutionary. I am the one who changed. I have to change my attitude if I really want to transform the reality all around myself. I went back to Adonis, but now let's go back to Darwish, because, of course, the tragic revolution of the Palestinian condition was due to the fact that they were thrown out from their own countries, from their own houses. And so the condition of the Palestinian is, by definition, the condition of the revolutionary who is transforming day by day his life existence in exile. And the new hero, that is very important, is not any longer as the one of Mustafa Kamil at the beginning of the last centuries, but by the 50s, the new hero is the Palestinian refugee who resist against the bad fortune of his time, of his existence. Another extremely interesting revolutionary poet in the 70s in Egypt is Ahmed Fouad Negm. Ahmed Fouad Negm is a poet who wrote in dialect, in Egyptian dialect, and he was a accompanied by Sheikh Imam, a blind musician, and his song were known by heart from the Egyptian, and it was a way to express their disappointment toward the political difficulties that Egypt went through in the 70s. And then another important revolutionary poet is Saad Yusuf from Iraq. I mean, of course, I am just mentioning the most important poets of the 50s, 70s who are still important until now in the heart of Arab people and intellectual, and they are the mentor of many new generation. Saad Yusuf is an Iraqi who lived in exile in London, in England, since many decades now, and he had to run away because he was a communist, and he remained pretty revolutionary in his writing, and he gave voice to the poor people living in the foreign suburbs in the West, much before this important new immigration that took place recently. Next. Okay, and this is another incredible revolutionary. This woman is Etel Adnan. Etel Adnan witnessed the Lebanon civil war at the end of the 70s, but she was not alone. Of course, also Darwish was there, Adonis was there, and many other wrote on the topic. But why I choose Etel Adnan to remember that period? Because here we listen to a woman voice, and it is extremely interesting because not because it is the first time that we have a woman poet talking about revolutions, but because with her poetry, Apocalypse is just creating an important connection between nature and the civil war, the destruction of the human being and destruction of nature. Let's read a small passage of what she's writing. It rained blood. Holy cities caved in. Nobody watched the fires. Our imagination survived the onslaught. Why? It inflicted upon itself such terror we can't comprehend. The terror is here, never relenting. The wind blowing, the sun orbiting. Where would it be if not amongst us? Change. So she's a woman. She's a very particular woman, and she writes in English. That is also a sort of revolution because she is expressing the transformation that intellectual underwent during the age of the colonial system. And this was not well accepted by the academicians of the Arab world, because of course the Arab language is the sacred language. So therefore, how can you consider an Arab who writes in English or in French? And but in the same time, how can you consider their poems without the roots, the culture, the feeling, the spirit of Arab poetry? You cannot say she is an English poet, but you cannot say that she is not Arab. So in this condition of a limbus, we find a lot of poets which are the expression of this important revolution, of this avant-garde of a world transforming languages and culture in order to express the universal spirit of human being. Next. Thank you. So art is a revolutionary element. That is what Adonis says. It is an element that disrupts the structure, removes certainties which cannot be rationally overturned. Art can anticipate the change that takes place in the consciousness first. And this is what Adonis said, and it is extremely interesting to read few of passages of an important poem, long poem, which was dedicated as a playwright for Napoli European Festival in 2008, which means 3 years before the Arab revolt took place in 2011. The title of this play is Trees Lying on the Light. Ashjar Taqiyat al-Nur. Change, please. It is a book where it is a play where he speaks about many philosopher, artists, and intellectual of Naples, and he starts with Giordano Bruno, who was a revolutionary because he was going against the oppression of the church, oppression and corruption of the church in the 16th century in Italy, of course. And the interesting things that he introduced students on protest. And he is also introducing a decalogue. And the person who's reading this decalogue in order to create a new society is a woman. So students and women are protagonists of this play, and they are paving the way to an important change. So this is what they write, the students. Take the blanks, open their breasts to the barracks. These are the chimneys for the wood of the gods. The youngs in this poem of Adonis support the poor and the workers. They are aware of the thirst for justice and warn a calm society can explode. And this is what happened. Then always in the same play, the students explain that they know that the word freedom has lost meaning. And this is what they write, what they say. Freedom here has another name, murder. And then they indicate the rule for living together, diversity, plurality, and multiplicity, better to live in this land. Next, please. Always from the same play, we read the commandments. It is a call to fight against violence, to fight against the idea of war, and to uphold human rights. And here it is the first commandment: fight. Do not make war. Do not make war. Imagine. Do not dream. We need a real empowerment in order to build the future. And this is to challenge the tendency of the fundamentalist conservative who are romanticizing about their past, a past which is a static model. And here comes the fourth commandment. Your present is the son of the future, not the past. In Adonis' play, the workers strikes because there is no job, but their dignity comes from their work. And here it says, without work, there is no freedom, there is no work. I love my hands. So here are just few extremely important and interesting elements that came out from this poem that was written just before the Arab Revolt took place. But let's see what happened. Next, please. Okay. The Arab revolts took place in a moment of great important economic crisis. Of course, I read that you had many interesting presentation about the Arab revolts, so I will not talk from an historical point of view of what happened. What is interesting to know that among the slogan used by the students and the women and the people in the squares asking for freedom, especially in Tunis, there was this verse by Al-Qasim al-Shabi, Abu Qasim al-Shabi. If a people one day want to leave, Fate will answer to this desire. Night will vanish and chain will break. And in the song of Benamour, the famous rapper, Tunisian rapper, he was saying, Tunis is my country. I am proud to be Tunisian. Next. And here we are in the beautiful Tahrir Square, the night of the Great Revolution, and the famous Egyptian dialect poet Abnoudi dedicated them a beautiful long poem where he is saying, wonderful youth has transformed winter into spring. And here it is the miracle. The victim is alive. Kill me, my death will cancer your kingdom. I'm writing with my blood a new life for my country. This is my blood. Or is it the spring? Both of them are green, and I am smiling for happiness or sadness. Change? But of course, after the Arab Revolt, conservatives went back to power. And these are images from the strikes of women in Tunis who had to protest against the will of going back to the past and abolish a constitution that had been approved in 1959 by Bourguiba, granting rights to women. They wanted to change the destiny of women in Tunis, but their protest made a step forward. And here we come to the voices of the poets in this phase of counter-revolution that took place after the Arab revolts. Next, please. And in fact, that it was a disaster what happened after the Arab revolts was evident for the poets, of course, as for everybody else. And here we read for some comments by Saad Yusuf. Saad Yusuf wrote a long poem criticizing the enthusiastic welcoming of the revolution. And he said, this is just one sentence from his poem, what Arab Spring? Only a chicken would say Arab Spring. And in the same period, Ahmed Fouad Nejm in Egypt, after rejoicing for the Arab Revolution, sad for the counter-revolution, wrote, brothers of Arabia, once cheated, you don't deserve to be greeted. It is no use whining, no use pining for dreams that fleet. It isn't right to seek retreat like doormats under Western feet. It isn't right for you to sing of revolution. Your Arab Spring was quick to pass from drama to farce. Your freedom isn't at all that good when your slogans drip with blood. Invoking Islam won't get you far when you're seen as a terrorist from the start. So, from these verses, in few words, we perceive what happened in the eyes of those people who had been dreaming for that change, for that dramatic revolution that didn't take place. Next, please. And after the end of the Arab uprising, what we find is a radical change, and that it is expressed in the formal change of the language that became the instrument, the main instrument to communicate the destroyed geography. Again, Adonis, who said in an interview that a change of regime cannot be called a revolution. There are two conditions for a revolution in an Arabic country. First, a total separation of religion and politics. Second, equal rights for women and men. The point is to respect individual right is other thing than just tolerance. Next, please. This is what came out, the result of all that hope destroyed in a very short time. The narrative structure of poetry broke down, and the poet, after the revolution, write a paragraph and then suddenly has an empty space, as we find in the poet of the Iraqian Dunia Mikhail. The title of the poem is A Burnt Paper in Mutanabbi Street. Hence, is it a sign, this flying paper? She switches back from the reality to the universe. When I come to you, I hurry up. As the moon, I cross the sky. So here, what we have in this poem, it is an absolute passage out from a present, which is just an absolute black destruction. Next page, please. But what is, again, the role of woman in this situation? Of course, there are many poets writing about the situation after the revolts. But what is interesting is that women are able to transcend the drama of that moment. As we read in this poem of the Syrian Khawla Dunya. At last house, there was no room for grief, nor farewell tears, nor exile of the disappeared. They have gathered their dear once within their ribs and have gone away. This is what remains of the Syrian revolution, which so rapidly turned into a civil war. But here again, another comment of another Iraqi woman, Manal al-Sheikh. Men plan wars and women survive in the rubble. Next. And another Iraqi poet, Amal al-Juburi, who wrote Hajar before the occupation and Hajar after the occupation. Why my country's poems are written by the light of graves, when words disappear. Cities explode on the heads of their crowds. One death triumph over my life, but you'll never kill me. And again, this strong idea of surviving no matter what happened is there in another important poem by another woman. Next. Here we are, the Syrian Maram el-Masri. She lives in Paris. And these are just the few verses from her poem entitled Freedom Arrives Naked. From the top of the Syrian mountains, in the refugee camps, her feet drown in the mud, but she keeps advancing. Her throat is cut, but she doesn't stop singing. That means that each woman, no matter what difficulty had to face, she was still fighting for her dignity, for for a better living in their country, for a better future for their kids, whether they were in the camps, whether they had to face the mud, whether they had to face the horror of exile. Next. But what do we perceive from these poems? That the poetic spirit of this poet, had the power to retune and reconnect a discordant, divided world. And as we heard from this poem, the sufferance, the pain, but still the life indicated within these verses is rooted in a memory, and it is the sign for going forward to a different life. And the possibility of transformation that is within the words is evident in this tapestry. This tapestry is called the flying carpet, as most of the images that we have been watching until now, these are masterpiece that we have at the Fondazione Orestiadi in Sicily, Italy, and the museum is the Mediterranean Weft, that means Trame Mediterranee. This last work, like the first one of the boat, this last work is by Lorenzo Romito. And Lorenzo Romito is an Italian artist who worked with a group of Kurds carpet weavers immigrated in Italy. And they took the shape of the roof of the Holy Chapel of the Norman Royal Palace in Palermo, that has the shape of the muqarnas. Those who are studying Arabic culture and art, they know the muqarnas is engraved wood with drawings. So they took just the shape of this ceiling and they made it as a carpet. But this carpet is not bottom up, but is up, down, upside down. It is upside down. That's why it's called the flying carpet, because it is a place where people can sit together and discuss. The symbol is we can dialogue with immigrants, foreigners, and with our people and with our past. The dialogue can bring to us a better future. It is a way to show how creativity can give an answer, a positive answer to the desperation of today's. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Very appealing, very moving, very touching, really. It's a poetry, it always removes and moves forward, helps us move forward. Victoria, you are there. Okay. It's been very, very beautiful, and I'm going to give the floor to Victoria because I'm sure she will she's willing to pose you some question. Before that, I would like to read one of the questions that is being posted already, which is about the translations of the poems that you have read. Are there yours? I mean, have you translated the poems yourself, Francesca?
Yes, in fact, I was. Wait a minute. The English translation is mine, except one I mentioned by Anram Abdullah. That was the poem by Manal Sheikh. The Arab translation in Italian is in this book. Don't look for me during the war. And it is the beautiful title of a poem. This book was made by my former students. They are all professors now, and of our language. And the title of the poem is the poet is Marwan Ali. Marwan Ali, and wait a minute. And this was translated into Italian, and then I translated from Arabic to English, of course, because of this event.
Okay, all right.
And in Arabic is في الحرب لا تبحثوا عني.
Okay, thank you very much.
Book.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it is in Italian, but there is the Arabic text also.
Okay, All right. I hope Professor Soha Abud, who is the one who formulated this question, is satisfied with your answer. But I'm sure if she wants to ask something else, she will be on the other line. Before giving the floor to Victoria, I don't want to forget to mention something that might be interesting, thinking on the students that are on the other side and looking at the lecture, which your talk has recalled me a lot. I mean, talking about the important role of poetry, moving and giving impulse to many of the activism and activists and activism in societies, and pushing for social change and for the fight for a better future for societies. And this is what we can witness, and the strong relationship between poetry and other manifestations of art and culture. And this is what we can see in the current exhibition that we can visit. The students attending the lecture can, probably many of them have already done, but if not, I really recommend it. There is a wonderful exhibition now at the Reina Sofia Museum entitled Trilogía Marroquí, Moroccan trilogy, and which is an exhibition dedicated to the last 70 years of Moroccan art. I mean, from the independence until now. It's a historical exhibition because it is something very important that a temple of contemporary art is doing, which is the Reina Sofia Museum. And if I recall this now, is because the exhibition, there is a very important section in the exhibition in which a large selection of magazines is presented, and one of those magazines is the Souffles magazine, which was founded in 1966 by Abdellatif Laabi, a very prominent Moroccan poet. Is still alive, of course, and still very active in writing. And all those poems, not only his poems, but many other colleagues and intellectuals from the time, that were compiled in the magazine Souffles, are very much representing that very important movement of social change as well in the Moroccan society. No, those poems pushing also for a new future. So it's visiting that. It's also a way to really witness and see with our own eyes how poetry can really take a very important part of the discourse, of the shared discourse on social justice and so on. So Victoria, it's your turn. Maybe you want to post or comment on the lecture, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Francesca, for your interesting speech. It was a real pleasure to listen it. I'm sure those present have a lot of questions to ask you, but I would like to open question time by asking you which of the young authors that can be described as poets of the revolts of the Arab Springs do you think are going to have a greater impact on the way of writing poetry among the new generations of engaged poets, if we can call them so?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to both of you, to Nuria and Victoria. First of all, because maybe it was not quite evident, but the point is that with Negma poems, which were sung in the houses privately in the 77, because there were important revolution before the 2011 revolts. But the point is that the press didn't not speak about that. And people were arrested, and it was impossible to speak. And the only hope people had to keep thinking, it was singing verses of hope or disaster or whatever it is, but just singing poems would give hope and keep alive the possibility of remembering what is human dignity and what is right and what is correct and what it is the real reason for we have to keep alive our spirit in searching for a better living to improve our condition as human beings. And this is very important in Arab poetry, and this has been since the pre-Islamic age until now. The poet is the speaker of the community. So, of course, I have been speaking about the revolutionary poet, because the official poets are speaking for the rulers from the pre-Islamic age until nowadays, and they are all enthusiastic of the achievement of the rulers or of the achievement of the religious evolution. Because, for instance, it is hard to say, but there is a woman whose nickname was Amal al-Nasr, and she was writing poetry for the Caliph Baghdadi, the so-called poet, the so-called Caliph al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS. So, of course, language is a tool. Language can bring about a revolution, can bring hope, can bring transformation, respect and dignity, but not all words are used in this sense. So what is the role of poets like Shauki, Adonis, Darwish, and others? It was extremely important because they kept together the feeling for the right to be respected and the right to survive with the dignity of a human being. And it is still nowadays an important example, not only for the new generation, but also for the future generation. As for the poets of nowadays, I cannot but say that many among them undertook the lesson and the role of their major poet mentors of the 50s. We find words or metaphors used by Adonis, by Darwish, by Kabbani, according to the different styles, because there are different styles, there are different voices. I mentioned among the new generation, the person that I felt are more innovative. But it is correct to mention, together with Maram El Masri or Amal Juburi and wait a minute, I want to Eman Al Sheikh. She's great, I think. Dunya Mikhail, they're wonderful. But I would not forget Marwan Ali. Marwan Ali is absolutely an excellent poet from my point of view, no? And also Najwan Darwish or I mentioned Dunya Amal Ismail, and I want to mention also another extremely interesting woman. She is migrated in Germany now, and see, Fatin Al Ghorra, and also from Egypt, Imam Mital, even if he's not very a young generation, or Abdelmonem Ramadan, and among the other generation, I would mention Amal Musa and Ashura Twebi, and Mohammed Ghair Olid Ahmed. I mean, he's not younger anymore. But of course, these are the most important poets who wrote about the Arab revolts and the after Arab revolts. And I thought that it was extremely important to speak about what has been written after the Arab revolts, because we don't have news about what's going on. And what's going on is a disaster. But within this disaster, there is hope. There is the determination of these men and these women to keep fighting for the right to have their human dignity respected. And I am very confident in their fights, because history teaches us that it has always been like that. If, as the Shabbi at the beginning of last century was saying, when the people wake up, nobody can stop the people. It is a long way, it is a dramatic way, but that is the history of humanity. And in that, I trust we have a great, important expectations.
Yeah. Francesca, Professor Soha Aboud is precisely also posting another question related to that issue of the diaspora. She's asking, she says that it would be interesting to know who of the poets that you have mentioned are living in their native countries or in exile or emigrated.
For sure, for sure. Thank you very much to Professor. I don't see her, but okay.
She's there.
I'm sure she's there. I don't see her, but okay. So thank you very much. In fact, I'm just organizing myself. So Maram El Masri is in Paris. Widad Nabi, the dear friend Widad Nabi, she's in Germany. And she writes wonderful poems. And then we have always Marwan Ali, I mentioned before, he lives in Baghdad. And Dunia Mikhail, she's abroad. Khadem Khanjar is in Baghdad. And no, sorry, I made a mistake. Marwan Ali is not. I made a mistake. So what else? So Dunia Mikhail is abroad. The Egyptian, they are in Egypt, but not Imam Mersal. Imam Mersal, she's not in Egypt. And as for the Mohammed Ben Nis, I didn't mention Mohammed Ben Nis, but he wrote a beautiful poem where he spoke about the immigrants killed during their migration in the Mediterranean Sea, and he's in Morocco, of course. Ashura Twaib is abroad, and is Fauzi. Khaled Matawa is abroad, is in the States. Amal Musa is in Tunis. Monsef Hohaibi is in Tunis. I mean, there are many. I answered. I mean, just a good number among them. Yeah. Wait. Are there questions?
Yeah. So, yeah,
Faraj Bayraktar is in Sweden. Many are in Sweden. Yeah. See.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Marwan Ali is a Kurd Syrian, and he's abroad, of course.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. Victoria, do you want to continue with another question?
Yes, I would like to know, Francesca, if you are planning to translate your collection of poems into English or any other language. I know this is sometimes hard, but as they are so new and so unknown for most of scholars, I would like if there is any plan of or project of translation.
I am planning to translate Adonis' book because it's extremely important. I mean, the playwright. It is extremely important because in really 2008, it is unbelievable. Adonis wrote that important poem where he's talking about the revolution, and it is 3 years before. It's unbelievable. And so, since this is my own my work, which I translated from Arabic in Italian, so it's going to be. It is short. I'm very busy, but I have to translate in English because it is a duty for all of these very good friends, these poets, which are so important. As for the book, In Word Don't Look for Me, this is a book, as I said, I was not the only one. I wrote this book. I wrote it with Oriana Capezio, Elena Chiti, and Simone Sibilio. So actually, it should be easier to translate it. It should be easier. I hope we will. I promise we'll make it. I promise you. It needs, what is difficult is to translate it in English because it is not our language. I mean, I translated, in fact, very short verses because these were quite easy. I didn't have to work too much in the translation because my English is not as good as the English of a poet, of course. So it needs the cooperation of native British poet in order to have. I mean, this is my opinion. My first book in my life was Arab poets in Sicily, and when I translated the Arab poets of the Middle Age, among them Ibn Hamdis, who came also in exile in Al-Andalus. After the translation in Italian, I worked with the best Italian poet because I wanted to give the shape of poetry to the poems, because otherwise we get the content, but we don't get the structure of the poems. And poetry, as we know, in Arabic, especially in Arabic, it is metaphor, image, and content, and rhythm and music. So without that, is not poetry, is prose. And it is so important to transmit to our students and to our public how important is this art for the Arabs. Is really the most important art. As for the Italian, it's music or painting, but.
Yeah.
And it needs rhythm, no? Like, okay, you have Beethoven, but the director of the orchestra is giving the rhythm, and that's everything for poetry. But I'll do it, promise.
Yeah. I would like to remind the students that are joining us to include their name, family name, program, and university on the chat at the YouTube channel, so that we can afterwards provide you with a certificate. Yeah. Sorry, this parenthesis not to have anybody forget about that. I think I didn't read it fully, the question by Soha Aboud, so let me ask you. She would like to get your opinion, Francesca, on you think the production of the poets is different when they live in exile, when their writing come from the experience of living abroad, living on exile? Mm-hmm.
This is a beautiful question. Thank you. Thank you very much. In fact, when she was asking me this question, I was thinking about a very good poet who lives in Germany, and he is mixing his Arabic with German. And of course, being a professor of Arabic language, this is a huge issue. And that, in fact, was trying to find the poet. I'm not able to be so fast. Anyway, you can tell Professor that she can take my address by mail, and I will give her the name and the address.
I think she should have joining us here.
I found it.
Okay.
I am talking about Fadil El Azawi. Fadil El Azawi. He lives in Germany, and the title of the poem is "The Poet of Exile," and he is using used to introduce German words in his poems. And the reason why I also introduced the Et El Adnan among the poets I mentioned, it was exactly for this reason. It is a revolution to transform your language. Adonis says the language is my island, but the language for him is pure classic Arabic. But what about the island of someone who's living abroad but is taken by the rhythm, the voices, the expression of this new place where the person lives? I mean, in world history, it is important to to study the literature and the language of a given place until now. But what's happening now with this world communication? There is an important changement that is going on. Is it the sign of a new age where we are losing our identity? Is our identity strictly linked to something fixed, unshakable? Or, as Mahmoud Darwish wrote in his poem Tabakat, Al-Mutahawwil, أنا المتحول. I am the one who's always transforming myself within and without. But of course, the structure of my thoughts, if they have been rooted in a language in my early age, it is difficult that they change. But it is also true that for certain people, like Etel Adnan, even if she's Arab, she was born in Lebanon, but she was born in Lebanon like our dear friend Abdelatif Labi, was born in Morocco, but at the time where they were under the French colony, and he studied in French, and so his poetry mostly is in French. Even if I was there in Casablanca at the House of Poetry when many years ago, for the first time, he read his poem translated into Arabic by himself, but with the friend of an Arabic poet, because he really wanted to give the right rhythm responding to his feeling. So you're lucky to can see this exhibition.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yes, of course. No, but this issue of the language is very interesting. I mean, it's as legitimate, no, as calling it as a homeland, no, the language as a homeland, or allowing all those that express themselves in another language also to be part of the national literature movement, no. So yeah, this is a duality that is very interesting on itself. Let me pass to you another question by Judith Clement.
Yeah, one second. Sorry, just 1 second, because it's just to finish. There is an Italian poet, important poet, whose name is Valerio Magrelli, who recently wrote an encyclopedia of Italian poetry. And he started with the Greek poet, then the Latin poet, then the Arab poet, and then the Italian poet and dialect poet. So you see, also the Italian language across 1,000 years has changed, no, 2,000 years, has changed so many language without never losing our identity.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Good point. No, it's always very good to compare with others and other territories, because sometimes it's important not to lose the scope, no, the focus on that. So I just was about to read Judith's Clement question. She's asking. She says, "I would like to ask Professor Corrao how she thinks the future for female Arab poets will be, as it seems they are slowly gaining a bit more room in the conversation."
Of course, I am very optimistic, even if the scene at the moment is not very bright. Just look what happened in Istanbul just a few days ago, and what is going on even in Italy. I mean, everywhere in the world, it is a moment of fear, particular fear, and many statistics are denouncing the fact that women are losing power, they are losing role, and they are going backward in a very sad condition. But notwithstanding that, we cannot stop women, as we know, because as our women poet, the one I mentioned, even though they are in a deep desperation because they lost everything. I mean, those who are living in Germany or in Sweden now, they lost their family, they lost their houses, their relatives, the places, the perfume. This is a sense of lowliness that was anticipated by Mahmoud Darwish 40 years ago when he was talking about the Palestinian going away from their land. And now again, these women are very important because they are giving a memory of this present to their kids in order to remember how horrible is war, how nonsense is war and destruction. And the hope is that the feeling of hope that this desperation anyway is feeding can educate a new generation of kids respecting their mothers, of husbands respecting their wives, of fathers respecting their children. And this is our responsibility because this is what we teach to our kids, we women. And it needs courage. One has to be brave, not aggressive, but brave.
Mhm.
You know,
Absolutely.
Gandhi used to say that he learned how to be non-violent revolutionary from his wife, who was able to obtain what she wanted without fighting. So it is not always like that, but we can make it.
Mhm. Good. Victoria?
No, I just thank her these comments, which are very cheerful and optimistic, and I'm with Professor Francesco 100%, and I hope so. I hope so for women in Arabic world. I have no questions. I don't know if we have still some questions.
I would like to ask you maybe a last question, Francesca. Which is your, how do you see this new trend of poetry, which is what is called the slam poetry? This very young, breaking style of practicing living the poetry, as for instance, the very well-known Rafif Ziadeh, the Palestinian,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
very
yeah.
brave, talking about courageous women. She is really one of those.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so thank you very much for mentioning because I was too much an old style professor thinking about classical age, not spotting on the last event. I should have mentioned the Jumana Haddad, who has been giving the title for the slogans during the Beirut revolts in 2019. She was the first, the most interesting poet calling for intervention. I mean, what were we talking about? Slime poetry, dear friend Januria. You know, Ibrahim Dis was a Sicilian poet, and he fled from Sicily and he came to Al-Andalus because the Norman had conquered Sicily. When he arrived in Al-Andalus, he was no one because nobody knew him. He was a poor guy, even if he was an excellent poet, but nobody knew. What happened? It happened something very typically Arabic. He met the prince, Mu'tamid bin al-Abbad, yani مش had, not everyone, just the great prince with a great knowledge of poetry. Oh, and I don't know now. I don't remember exactly what happened, but the prince said a verse, just a verse, and Ibn Hamdis made Islam poetry. He created immediately a poem out of that verse. So, I mean, it has always existed in the Arab world. It is
mhm,
an Arabic tradition. Once at the Fondazione Orestiadi, I just mentioned before, we had a festival of slam poetry, but it was 20 years ago. That means
mhm,
that in popular literature, in folklore, it is a tradition. It is normal. I'll tell you more. In the Italian tradition, before television and cinema, people had nothing to do at night, so used to learn by heart Dante Divine Comedy. And they would spend the evening just creating poems out from the inspiration given by Dante, or they were just repeating Dante's poem. I mean, poetry is joy. Is joy of life. Poetry is a way to share together pain. Poetry is a way of communicating the spiritual soul, the love, the joy, and the happiness, whatever it is, human, whatever is human. So, welcome to slam poetry, but please, let's call it as it is, normal Arabic improvisation.
Good.
I think that the new generation, they don't know. They didn't do maybe classical Oriental studies. So that's why they don't know. Because it is something that has not been recorded among the official classical tradition. You know, I'm an expert of Khayal Zil, shadow plays. Shadow plays, they have been studied recently and very little because it is in dialect. But also shadow plays is full with improvisations.
Yeah.
But it is folklore. And you know, folklore is not decent literature.
No, of course it is. It's been always there. It's been always there. I mean, just you take well, it's since centuries. Maybe the fact that it is being spread nowadays with by media and these new technologies, YouTube and Instagram and TikToks and all those new channels make too many have the feeling that this is a new kind of expression. No, this is why it has been underlined as new.
Dear Duria, the funny thing is because the American discovered it and they brought it in Europe and now it's going elsewhere in the world. And so we think that it's something new. The point is that maybe it is new for the Americans, but it is nice, it is appreciated now. It is very nice that is appreciated now and that we came up with modernity using our tradition. It's perfect.
No, that's yeah, of course. Why not? No, why not? Okay, I think well, there is one last question, and then we will be closing the session because it is already 1 hour and 20 minutes that we are here. Is Susar Caja? Can I ask who is your favorite Arabic poet of all time?
One, only one.
Well, we allow you to mention 3 if you want. I mean, the compromise is high, so.
Yes. Of course, this because I am Sicilian. That's it. Of course, Adonis, because I could learn and appreciate Arabic poetry thanks to Adonis' poems. Then I should be unfair. It is very difficult. I really love all my poets. I mean, the one I translated now and the other ones. I mean, I like very much Mahmoud Darwish. I adore Etel Adnan. Okay, the third is Etel Adnan. Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Wow,
she really answered to my heart. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would say that some poetry, the poet you were mentioning before, together with Jumana Haddad and many others, they're excellent. They're excellent, and I am very happy that it exists. This going back to tradition with innovation, because it is a way to conquer again the heart of the young generation, which are too far from poetry, because the way we study poetry at school is very boring. I'm speaking about Italy. I don't know how it is in Spain, but I'm talking about Italy. So it is very difficult to take their heart again.
Well, maybe with these new technologies will help. I hope so. Anyhow, it's been a real pleasure to have you with us, Professor Francesca Maria Corrao. Really, I hope all the students and all the attendees would have enjoyed as much as we have. As you said, poetry is a joy. It's been a joy to share this session with you. Victoria, many thanks also to you and your program for proposing this to Casa Árabe, and long life to poetry. Yeah.
Yes, long life.
Long life to poetry. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. Thank you. Bye bye.